Carter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to speak with you today. Vertical SaaS is one of the hottest topics when it comes to SaaS in general, and what better company to highlight and founder to highlight than you? Can you tell us a little bit about INGENIOUS.BUILD?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a project management information system for all real estate development and construction. How much do you want to know? How much do you want me to go down that rabbit hole?
Well, explain a little bit about the PMIS space. What does that acronym stand for, and what is it that you're doing differently than some of your competitors like Procore and some of the bigger players in the market today?
It's a great question. So the project management, we know it from different areas, from software development to
Mhm.
different types of organizational project management. But this is specific around real estate development and construction. So you're dealing with complex financials and budgets, change management around contracts to drawings and communication from the field and back into the office. So there's a lot of complexities around the different processes in the industry. It's been horrendous. If you look at the stats, McKinsey and all these other firms have done a tremendous amount of studies just to show how inefficient the industry is. $10 trillion a year being spent in real estate development. A few trillion of it's just wasted due to inefficiency, which is
And like,
mind blowing,
what
right?
kind of inefficiency is this? Is this like projects that aren't getting done? Is this material that's not getting from A to B? Like, what's the inefficiency?
All the above. But yeah, I always like highlighting like that there's a very simple process in construction, and we use it in other areas as well. We call it an RFI, request for information. And today, with all the different softwares in place, the stats are still terrible. And it's the simplest process in construction. And it could be something as simple as somebody on the field is saying, "What way should this door swing?"
Hmm.
Right? Like, should it swing towards the interior wall, or what way should it go? And the average response time is 9.7 days, a few $1,000s in administrative costs, and almost 23% of the time, no response whatsoever to the question.
Wow,
That's the stats. Yeah.
that seems so inefficient. And is it like a is it just like an industry wide problem where it's like it's a uh, not to like go out on a limb here, but is it like a skill set issue, or is it a business process issue, or is it a systems issue like you guys are solving?
It's the process is that, like, to be honest, I mean it's mind blowing to me. Like, there's clearly very 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 intelligent people in this industry, because you look around, like, look at the cities and the things that people have developed with the tools that they have. But it's done in a very inefficient manner from a communication standpoint. And when I talk about that from an inefficiency from a communication standpoint, we are the most fragmented industry in the world, but we're supposed to be the most collaborative industry in the world. So just think about that, from GCs working with their subs, the architect and the owner, all supposed to be collaborating to deliver this project on budget, on time. But yet everything on how you share that information is highly inefficient.
And GCs being general contractors,
Yeah.
and and I know,
Got to make sure I'm careful with my lingo there.
yeah, I mean, not everyone knows, and I'm wondering when I think about these project management information systems in construction, my understanding is a lot of them are geared at general contractors, but
That's correct.
yours is different. Can you explain how it's different?
So it's a newer way of how do you implement a better technology to collaborate, and you see this in other platforms, like Google has done this and Slack has done this. If you're familiar with Slack, you have workspaces, and you could have two workspaces. You're part of your company's workspace and another company, and you could bridge a channel to chat between the two organizations. We do that with all the data, with all the processes in construction. So you could retain your legal basis based on what was said and when
Mhm.
it was said. But we do the same thing with like something like an RFI.
But you guys just took a Series A investment not too long ago, and part of that $37 million Series A, congratulations, a great
Thank you.
round, was a number of strategic investors that are
Mhm.
not GCs. These investors are JLL, Cushman Wakefield. Like these are what and why specifically this type of company?
Yeah, it was very strategic. In fact, like when I decided to create Ingenious, I did a deck to myself,
Mm,
and it was around the go-to-market strategy. And there's a few things in that. Like I worked at Cisco. John Chambers had a methodology of don't create a product unless you have a clear path of obtaining 40% market share or greater. You don't have a clear path of doing that. Like you might go down a journey for 10 years of your life and be at risk. And to me, that's 10 years of your life is a lot of time to throw away without clarity on that journey. So
it's a lot of
that was
time.
something that I wanted. It is a lot of time, and I got grays. I didn't have grays when I started this journey.
You look
Uh,
great. You look great. I'm sure our listeners will agree.
that's funny. um, but yeah, I think that was the one thing is like I really wanted to look at the different softwares in the space, they had fundamental flaws. They still have fundamental flaws. They're singular workspaces compared to like us being a multi workspace, being able to collaborate and share data between those workspaces that drastically increases that communication efficiency and automatically covers everybody's legal risk. Um, these
This is
other
your
platforms don't do
competitors,
that.
right? That you mean like your the other platforms being companies like Procore. What are other examples of companies that are?
Yeah, Procore, there's PM Web, eBuilder, there's
Mhm.
Autodesk Construction Cloud. And the interesting thing is those are all singular workspaces. So what that means is their own software doesn't talk to their own software. So if you're an owner developer on Procore and you're a GC on Procore, you just have to log into both of them and do the same entry twice. So if I need to file an RFI and I work as a GC, as a PM at a GC, I log in, file the RFI. Now, if my owner requires me to do it to cover their legal basis, I have to log out of that Procore instance and then log into this Procore instance and do it again. So the stats that I shared with you about that 9.7 days actually gets worse based on that configuration. And so the industry as a trend is getting worse stats instead of better.
So you're saying the existing PMIS project management information systems are actually introducing more lag because there's multiple constituents. There's the general contractors. There's the owners, developers. What other constituents are there?
The architects, engineers, the consultants, there's clearly the subcontractors that are out of the field and doing the work, and then there's subs of subs. So I own a concrete company, and we would use rebar subcontractors to come in, and we'd do the forms, and then we'd have the rebar company do it if we didn't have expertise or the manpower in a particular region to facilitate it.
And because you have multiple workspaces, you can take, if I understand correctly, all of these different constituents and stakeholders, and you can drive them into these projects. Where if you're using a different product or different company, and any of the ones that you mentioned, any of the competitors, they're going to have to log in and log out, depending on being a contractor or a developer or a supplier like your concrete company. Is that correct?
Exactly. And what you'll see is that these platforms, like what you mentioned earlier, is like Procore was uh, designed for general contractors. So it's not really optimized for how an owner developer operates. It definitely doesn't work for how architects or engineers operate. So they're doing things in a whole different process. So they're downloading everything that's coming out of Procore and trying to organize in Dropbox or SharePoint or whatever to cover their legal basis. And everybody's doing that around them, which is just creating that massive, massive inefficiency because when I also owned an architecture firm and we would wait until a particular day to gather up as much RFIs or submittals, which is the selection of a material on a project. So we didn't have to deal with context switching all day because it was such a large administrative overhead to do that context switch versus just a couple clicks to respond to something out in the field. Like it was
It
like
makes a ton of
download it,
sense.
put it in Dropbox. Yeah,
It
it's
makes a ton of sense. This limitation, and it's a fundamental structural limitation of these other softwares.
that's correct. All their architecture, their technical debt is something I thoroughly reviewed before I went down this journey because I'm like, what's the likelihood that they're going to be able to adjust course and do what we're doing? And it's such a complex moat that I'm like, there's no way they're going to be able to do it.
Okay. Can you talk more about this deck that you built before you started this company? Like, what was your thought process, and like, what did this deck consist of? And are we ever going to be able to see it?
Yeah, I'm turning red just thinking about sharing this, but yeah, you know, there was a few things. Like one was clearly that 40% market share,
Hmm.
and how do you do that, right? It was like I had to thoroughly analyze, and I think Procore has clearly created a successful business. They're doing a substantial amount of revenue every single year.
They're
They're
a great
growing year
company.
over year. Great company, and great. And I think Tui, who's the CEO over there, has done an exceptional job. Like
They were
he
my
had a
customer at my last company.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and they went through their own challenges. Like,
Mhm.
I completely get their position. They had to actually get people to adopt technology. Like, we're in a different position because thankfully a lot of people have adopted it to the path that they laid. It's just we're that next stage. It's like going from the Yahoo to the Google stage or Google to AI type of sequence. And I think the thing with that though, and looking at their go to market strategy, same thing on Autodesk and all these is their B2B sales, right? And B2B sales, and especially this industry, is a very long journey. It's 18 to 24-month sales cycles, very high CAC. You don't know CAC and you're a founder, it's customer acquisition costs, very important to know. And
Thank you for sharing
the
that.
the utilization rates of their platforms um, were low. And
Hmm.
like to me, those are all the indicators of like time to be disrupted. So how do you disrupt that type of process that exists today, and knowing the fundamental gaps in the entire industry as a whole? And that's what I really looked at. And the simple answer to solve for that is we all know viral effects do quick land grabs. They capture a market quickly. And that was something that we needed to do. And in order to do it is like, well, where do you initiate that, and how do you actually successfully accomplish it? So there's so many rabbit holes I could go down on each one. I'm going to give it a pause. Like, what's your thoughts just hearing that?
Well, immediately what I'm thinking about is that Paul Graham from Y Combinator quote, where he says, and I'm going to paraphrase and butcher this, but a lot of engineers will think about how to engineer the product. And because many of us are engineers or are technical when we're building our software companies, we think about how to build the product. But to
Mhm,
engineer the go to market from the beginning is such a crucial step. And that's what stands out
mhm.
to me, Nick, is you did that right off the bat.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that I geeked out on this. I wrote numerous books about these strategies, and it's still a big passion of mine. And I think it's every founder should really dig into this, and it's so critical because you have two options. One, either the product drives itself out to the market, or you have to market and sell it out to the market, and what one's faster, right? And there's different ways of doing that. In Ingenious, like we could leverage, bidding. Like if I'm a owner and I'm bidding down to GCs, I could put them on a free workspace, and it's on me to naturally drive them to convert to a paid workspace, just like everybody went through on Dropbox. If I send something to you on Dropbox and you like it, and you're like, oh, this would be great. I could store my files in the cloud. I could share things easily. Then it's on them to nudge you across to say, oh, for $4.99 a month, you could get, a terabyte of storage, and this is all. Here's your keys to the kingdom.
I think one of the reasons that you're so successful and you're going to continue to be so successful is because you really thought out the go to market sequence from the beginning. You implemented this viral aspect just like Dropbox did. And I think that has a lot to do with your viral explosive growth. So kudos to you, Nick. There's a lot to learn from that.
Thanks. Well, there's different aspects because you got to think about value add to the other side. If it's a one directional viral go to market, that could actually be a negative, right? So you got to think about how you benefit the other party. The founder of Waze wrote a really good book about how they went to market, and there's different aspects of what they did, but and why they got acquired was the drivers were sourcing the data and building the intelligence and the mapping. Like they got enough data to know cars were only going one direction on a road. So therefore they just labeled it a one way. It wasn't somebody that was driving out there and said it's a one-way street. They just got enough data to say it's a one-way street and this is how we're going to map you. But
Interesting. I didn't know
them
that.
using, yeah, it's pretty cool.
This is
And
Waze, the company Google
Ways,
bought.
yeah,
Yeah.
that Google bought, and it was a very powerful and intelligent move behind Google. But if you think about the Ways aspect, was there's a few things in it. Accessibility is key. So when I say accessibility, is you're already using Ways to map your directions, but when
Hmm.
you're there, it's just a button in the corner, and you could say, object in the road or police, and other people are doing that. So when you're driving, it says police up ahead. That's a bi-directional viral effect. It gives me value to know that police are up there, and then I'm getting mapping direction, so it's helping me. And so it's just the more users get on it, the more data that's getting populated for the organization. That create a tremendous amount of value for Google. But everybody, the more people using it, the better it is. But if you're on a map like Google Maps or Apple Maps, and you had to swipe out of the map, go into another app and say
Yeah.
there's police, and then swipe back out and go to another one, you'd have an attrition of users, less insights. You get pulled over and you're like, why am I doing this? Because I'm not getting that benefit. So you got to think about those bi-directional benefits from a viral
I think
go-to-market
that's really
strategy.
interesting because like one thing it's viral for me to be like, hey, look at this picture I took. And it's different to be like, I'm sending you something and you're reacting to it. And now we have this bi-directional. Is that right?
That's right, and like so, I'm talking about it from a data and like your benefit from an informational standpoint, but there's a big psychological standpoint to what you're talking about, and there's different ways. The psychology of doing it. Like there's a lot of, there's documentaries and books about that now, but there's also the way of what. Like even saying a secret, I would say a secret has more weight. Social value is what I call it.
Hmm.
So if I tell you a secret, when I share it with you, you're going to actually weight that more than most other conversations I have. If I had a conversation with Steve Jobs and I say, hey, I had this cool meeting with Steve Jobs when I was walking the campus, and I share it with you, you're more inclined to share that story with somebody else because it carries more weight. It gives you something, it gives you your own social proof to others. And you really saw that actually with like Uber on their go-to-market strategy, where they gave you $5 or $10 and they gave the other person $10. That's a monetary viral effect. But on top of it was, have you heard of Uber? And everybody could reflect back on the time when somebody or you yourself shared Uber with somebody else, and that was your social value. So it was two levers now accelerating that viral effect out to the market.
Well, that's great because, this podcast all about sharing your secrets. So we should have named it Secrets and Focus. Founder Secrets and Focus. Amazing. No, but that's actually really good insight. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And that is an amazing tidbit. Um, and I remember where I was when I first started using Uber. I remember being like, wow, this is amazing. They were all black cars. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
It
Back
is,
to
and I'm sure everybody listening
yeah,
will think about the exact same moment.
yeah. Put it in the comments. Um, the strategic investors. I really want to get back to this because I
Mm,
think that it's something that sometimes people will shy away from. And there are specific businesses that really benefit from strategic investors. And then there are businesses that can really be hurt from strategic investors.
mhm.
And being a verticalized SaaS company, JLL, Cushman Wakefield, these, am I saying that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you
And
got it.
there was another one that's really popular here in Miami. They're massive. I think it's Reality or what is it? Re Can you remind me of the name? I
Related.
Related. That's right.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
they're also an investor in your company.
Related's not, but we have Trammell Crow, the Crow Holdings family. So they're huge on development. I mean, there's a handful. Like the previous CEO of Avalon Bay Homes, which is a massive multifamily, is a direct investor. Yeah, we got a handful of like direct big developers that are part of Ingenious, which is Coke. Coke
Coke.
Industries.
Yep.
Yeah, they're direct investors as well, and phenomenal people. So yeah.
So and so can you help me understand like these are all development companies? Because I see the advertisements and there's like call JLL to get retail space down the street from me. Is this all are these all developers?
So this goes in, and I'm probably showing my cards a little bit on the strategy of Ingenious, but I think a lot of the people in the industry know it now. So we're a step ahead of
Here
everyone.
come the
But
secrets.
here comes the secrets. The big thing is it goes back to that viral effect, right? So when I was talking about that viral effect, the question is where do you initiate a viral effect? For us, and going into the real estate development and construction is like, well, the simple question is like, who does the most amount of development and construction projects? That's where I should start, right? And I was looking into and my knowledge of going through this industry. I'm like, who's the biggest GCs? And I started looking at them. Like, there's the Turners of the world, and like just massive
Hmm.
global GCs. But when I looked at them, like they're doing a, thousand, couple thousand projects a year. And I looked at the owner's rep side, which is under the brokerage. So like the JLLs, the Cushwakes, and those types of organization, they call
Hmm.
it PDS, Project Delivery Services. These, like a JLL does 48,000 construction projects a year.
That sounds like a
Like
lot.
that's a lot. And it's like a two-pronged approach. Is one, when they're going through their sales cycle, they're showing their clients ingenious on how they're going to manage your projects and give them insights to what's going on real time. And then downstream, when they're going through the execution of it, they're virally putting the platform out to the market. And then I digging into it more, nobody really creates software for how they operate. And they operate under different types of contract terms. On GCs, you're going to get a lot of what we call principal types of contracts. So it's just straight lump sum. It's $10 million to build this, and you're signing that agreement. And maybe if there's scope changes, there's going to be change orders around it.
But you kind
Then
of
there's also
deliver in that 10 million frame.
you deliver within that $10 million frame. Maybe there's $1 million of contingency, but there's buffer within there. Um, but then there's something called GMP, guaranteed max price, and then they're kind of jointly
Hmm.
working together, owner and the GC, to do these buyouts with the subcontracts. That's a little bit more complex. It's more rare.
Hmm.
Um, but when you're in the owner rep standpoint, there is some principal work that they do, but they also do a lot of advisory and agency work. And what that means is the contracts are landing with the owner. They're just the person in the middle with a tremendous amount of industry expertise to manage the day to day. So they review the contract and they say, "Here you go, owner. Like we reviewed it. Here's the risk behind this. Sign this." And it's actually a very valuable service. If you don't come from this industry and you're doing these projects, I don't know who's a great GC or teams, let alone the teams within the GC in a particular market. If
So
you're
this
going to
is the same thing
Miami,
if someone's like building a home or remodeling their condo, they're going to
exactly.
hire like a product management person and be like, I don't know what the tiles are supposed to look like or how much they cost, or is that kind of the
It,
concept?
exactly. If you were to move into a brand new city and you have no relationships, or even the city you live in, you don't know who to go to, like you're going to go based on referrals, but you're going to go through trial and error.
Hmm.
But you go to one of these firms that have been working and have expertise for 30 plus years in every single market. They know exactly who to go to and what risks to look out for. So you de-risk your position by paying a few percent of your project, but like it's worth it. It's worth it in every cent.
And so
But
your
now it's
strategic investors have arms that provide these services.
they do it for every big organization in the world, from the Cokes, McDonald's to the banks to you
Wow.
name it. They help those organizations deliver those projects as efficiently as possible. But there was no software that was designed to flow that information up to the client, and it was all singular workspace. So okay,
Hmm.
customer A, like we're going to deploy this workspace and we're just going to have people like work out of it. But then that customer could also work with a different firm in a different region. And so now they got to pay a premium for these other project managers to learn this other software to go into it. And it just creates a giant nightmare. These platforms weren't designed for this mechanism. So they're spending millions and millions of dollars every year trying to customize it to just try to get things more optimized
I mean,
versus just having a platform that comes in that is optimized for it.
it seems to me that the single workspace is a huge limitation. If you're a GC or
Massive.
contractor, you're like, okay, project starts, project ends. But there's so much more that's happening. And if you're somebody like a JLL or a Cushman and you're going through the process of buffer, or I should say, shepherding these projects, you need multiple workspaces. And so you're really hit a product limitation in the existing
Mhm.
market in order to get to that 40% plus market share.
Exactly. And I think it would be interesting to show a perspective of multiple workspaces if
Please.
it came from accounting, right?
Mm.
So think of the accounting process today. Like we send an invoice to you, you get it in your inbox, it goes to accounting, or you submit it on some form. But what if accounting systems could be all integrated and there was just built-in approval workflows, right? So then it would just go into your accounting. You're like, oh yeah, this is from Nick. I approve. I approve. But why do I have to type out the lines and align it to my cost codes? If I could automatically map that information, all of a sudden all accounting and the overhead becomes more of a data centric play of like, like what's our trends, and you're getting things real time, and you're just doing a digital approval workflows versus like manual administration. Like there's platforms out there that OCR
Hmm.
invoices, but like why? Like why are
Yeah.
we doing this? Like why can't we just connect the data and route everything and do these things in a more automated way?
Do you think it's an advantage that you're in this vertical SaaS space that you can do this? Like, where some companies, the reason this isn't happening is because we're in siloed systems across our accounting teams, and
Yep.
we're trying to put systems together. And the dream of something like a single ERP system is that we don't have to do that. And in some ways, do you think you have an advantage because you're in vertical construction?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a big advantage in there. And the nice thing is there's a lot of standards that came because of these manual processes, but they had to be defined to make them very tight. So it created a much better standardization around those data sets to allow us to then start doing these layering. But it's complex because you do have hierarchies of who does what through that operational flow. And that's what makes it very hard for somebody to create a multi-workspace environment. I mean, it is insanely complex.
So you think that the barrier to entry for your competition or their ability to adapt to this paradigm is hard, impossible,
Oh,
or a matter of time?
but it's not impossible. I would never say it's impossible, but like you really have to thoroughly understand. You got to be dialed from a software development standpoint. A lot of these firms aren't.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, the intelligence gathering, what I can research from product, knowing what works and what doesn't work. It's a tremendous build. And let's say you just remove all that and you just focus on a singular workspace solution like a Procore Autodesk. Both these firms and even Oracle have spent billions of dollars to compete in this space
Hmm.
and develop software, and they're still
Oracle has
not
a
dialed.
product for this
Oh
for
yeah,
construction.
they acquired a company called Aconex out of Australia. They have another platform called Unifier.
How long ago
They
did
got
they acquire them?
Textura. They acquired Aconex. It had to be maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Over
Wow.
$1 billion on that
Hmm.
one.
Wow.
Textura they acquired for 680 million, which was a company out of Chicago, just on the invoicing side of it.
And this is
And that
just
was
for
just invoice,
construction, or is this for
just
like
for
general?
construction, just for
Wow.
construction.
So this verticalized SaaS is actually interesting to some of these larger, more broad ERP players. That's how big of a
It
market
is
you're in.
It is a massive, massive market and opportunity. But that moat and that complexity to even just compete against a Procore, it's just tremendous, let alone doing a multi-workspace architecture to automate the legal workflows between the different parties. It's just it's 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 a whole different level.
Crazy. Let's talk about software development. I know you're a
Oh yeah.
self-made coder, self-taught coder. You have an engineering team that I think you're visiting right now, actually, if I'm not mistaken. Right.
Yeah, my VP of engineering and product, they're all in town. We got actually folks from JLL coming in because we got a bunch of very large clients going live for them here, and want to make sure everything's dialed.
Well, thank you again for taking time to speak to me and our listeners. So,
Of
tell
course.
me a little bit about your engineering team, how it's constructed, and how you're creating a competitive edge with your engineering team.
Oh, whew, that in itself is that's a big one, but it actually kind of goes coincides with our hiring practice, right? So you got to have really, really good engineers. There's ownership behind them. You want those 10Xers, but there's a lot of processes. And my VP of engineering has gone down insane rabbit holes himself, and I have a background in it. And he's taken it to a whole new level. I
I love
mean,
that.
we know the velocity of every single team. We know communication overhead costs per team. So, like, if your engineering team gets too big, let's say like they're focusing on a bunch of different features and they could be stepping on each other's toes. That means they need to meet up to talk about how they're going to work with one another.
Hmm.
So we try to reduce that as much as possible. So it's like having those elite teams that focus on specific functionality so they don't step on each other's toes. And then, like when you get into story pointing, like
Hmm.
we have anybody that's doing a development job, they use Atlas and they use Jira, Confluence, and such. And like it's different. my VP of engineering says is that it's different t-shirt sizes, but it's
Hmm.
based on your team and like what they expect, but you get a pattern pretty quickly. And we know the velocity of those teams. And you can say, okay, well, this team typically delivers, 40 or 50 story points on a weekly basis. And if there's slippage, it's like, what happened? Like, and how do we correct course and get it next week, to be back on
So
track?
your teams are they're in little scrum teams. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, they're Scrum teams, and there's a product manager working with them. So there's a team lead from an engineering perspective, which is like the product owner, and then there's a product manager. They're working together, and then even down to the engineers. So we'll like say, okay, these two developers are going to be working on this specific functionality, and we know exactly what we expect based on the TRDs
Mm. Which
and
stands
on
for?
those technical requirements documentation.
And then you
And
turn
so
those into story points. Is that right?
and those go into story points, and then they work through those flows. So it's and when we started out, like it was we're on Trello, like
Hmm.
we're
We used
we're
to
we're
use
out.
Trello. I used to use Trello. I remember Trello.
And Allison acquired Trello, which was a very smart move in my opinion, because if you're an early shop and you don't have that level of complexity that you need, you just need to get things moving and organized. Trello is where you start, and then you naturally migrate over into
Hmm.
Jira once you become established. So that's what we did, and thankfully, Ben, our VP of engineering, just geeks out on this all day long.
Talk more about hiring and specifically engineering hiring, and then after we'll talk about hiring some other roles. But talk a little bit about hiring engineers, engineering teams, how to get them productive, and then you also
Mm.
were talking about the management of them, how to make sure that the throughput is right, and you mentioned measuring the story points and their output.
Yeah, so to me, in my background, it was actually easier for me to hire technical people. So just because you could ask very technical questions, you could weight easy questions, way more complex questions, and then they could, whether it was in information security, which you have a lot of background with, but let's say it's
Hmm.
something like Cisco ASA firewalls back in the back in the day.
Sure.
What I used to deal with, I could ask them very basic commands like, "Hey, how do you set a command to generate a rule on a firewall, and how do you set the priorities on those rules so then
And
you
I
know
should
the
say that if you're an
sequence?"
engineer, it's going to be easier to hire engineers. And if you come from some founders are go-to-market founders, some founders are operations guys or gals, so it's a very like this is what I know, this is what I go after, this is how I hire type of thing. But that's why hearing from you how you hire engineers is super interesting, especially for those folks who may have a background that isn't engineering.
Yeah, and even with that, like my approach early on was just like it's all technical. It's different now, like because
Mm.
you could be technically strong, but you align like I always heard like, oh, cultural film. Like that's just a bunch of fluff. I'm like, no, it's not. It's
It
not fluff
matters
at all.
so much.
Is so much. It's the energizing behind the different teams. You could have somebody that's technically strong, but is super negative between like on how they communicate, and it demoralizes the team, and productivity just drops.
Especially if
So,
they're an executive. They can be so
oh
technically
my.
strong, but they're just an
Mhm.
a-hole and they ruin the vibe and they're terrible to work with and they undermine the rest of the executives and they know better than everybody. Those people can be
Yep.
just, I hate to use this word, but they can be cancerous.
They can, and I've seen. In fact, I had. This is a little bit of a quick tangent, but early on in Ingenious, I was just trying to establish early sales, and the reason behind that is I wanted to get the platform out so I could start getting feedback just through the sales motions.
Hmm.
Like, what are we doing? What are we missing? But keep it insanely small. So it was literally two AEs. That would be full cycle AEs. So they'd sell source. That means they got to do their own outbound. They
Hmm.
work through the demos. But there was one person that was at Ingenious that was to manage them and help define the processes. And I remember the guy. They called him Harvard because he said he went to Harvard and all this stuff. Like, and that was what was on his resume. He went to Harvard. Find out he didn't go to Harvard after the fact.
Ooh,
Like he did
that's
like one
not
of the
good.
online schools and like one of the courses,
Ooh,
but ended up.
that's terrible.
I just remember I'm like, give people the freedom. Like I hired him, he
Hmm.
was confident, everything sounded good. But then I started asking questions when I didn't see results. Like they would get one demo booked a month. A
Mm.
team of three people getting one demo booked a month. It was not the information I needed to get back into our software
Like
team.
collectively, you're getting one data point from three people.
Right.
That's
One
funny.
demo. And so I'm like, okay, well, something's not here. I didn't know sales like that like I didn't know B2B SaaS sales. So
At
I
the time.
started just keep at the top. Yeah. Now I'm still, you're never perfect, but like I geeked out on it. I went down that rabbit hole as well. And, like one of the first things out of the gate was like, well, how should we be going about getting
Mhm.
demos and setting calls? And there's different books like Jeb Blunt's Fanatical Prospecting was one that stood out to me with just like standard KPIs of
We'll
what
add
I
it in the
should
show
expect
notes.
from a team. Yeah, yeah, please do.
Hmm.
And he has his own courses and classes, which I thought were great. But just a very simple thing is like, what should I expect from outbound call volume from in emails? And one of the things he said was minimum 50 calls a day. I was
Hmm.
like, these people were doing like two or three at best a day. And I was like, okay, well, that's not right. I'm like, I
Hard
called in
lessons
this
learned.
end hard lessons learned. I called in the person. I'm like, hey, like, we're only getting one demo. Like, what's going on? Like, we need, like, what's the KPIs? Like, what are you holding them accountable to?
Hmm.
Where do we stand? And he wasn't giving me any clarity. And then I was just like, well, like, tell me how many calls. He's like, I'll have to get back to you. I'm like, you manage a team of two. You don't know, like this was your
Yeah.
expertise. And it turned into like a full blown F you, Nick. You don't know what you're doing. I was
That's
like,
always
I'm
how it
asking.
is. That's
That's
always
how
how
it
it
is.
is.
Oh,
That's always how it is. It's always like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You're the problem. Like, okay, that's
and my whole thing is, I'm like, listen, this is what I read. This is like, there's a pattern to this. Like, there's information. I research it. This is what's being said. I'm all ears to figuring out approaches. All I know is what we're doing right now is not working. So I'm looking for ways to level us up to get the engine moving.
very diplomatic of you.
And yeah, well, and then it kept on going sideways. Well, that two A's that worked for him had like no trust. They didn't respect me at all. And this manager at the time was
Terrible.
also can continue creating issues. I'm like, it's
Yeah, of
got to go.
course. Because once you realize that you're doing a bad job, the first thing you're going to do is start blaming the CEO of the company. And then
That's
the
literally
people
what
that work
happened.
underneath them, they're going to start doing the same thing. And it's like, all right, well, this is a
It,
recipe for disaster.
and that wasn't the first time I've gone through that. And I've gone through numerous times
It's going to
after.
happen all the time. It's
It's going
just
to
part of the
happen.
game. And if I
It's
can
part.
give
It
one
is.
advice to the people listening is get that done as soon as possible. Take care of that as quickly as possible. Do
As,
not let that linger.
as
It's
quick as
going to
possible.
happen. Get it out.
Exactly.
I made
And
that
this kind
mistake.
of goes into that point point of hiring, like that's where
Hmm.
I really had to geek out, and was the Einstein quote where like if I had only known I would have been a watchmaker. Like if I had only known I would have been the best recruiter in the world before I started this company.
That's the most important part.
It is a real, and you see this, like you read, like from Steve Jobs to Elon Musk, all these people, like they really went down the rabbit hole of recruiting and like what questions to ask and getting the right people, and that would be my statement. If I'd only known, I would have been a dialed in recruiter. And in a majority sense, recruiters are actually terrible in this industry
Sure.
because all they do is want to push papers, they want to push the CVs across the desk and sell you on that candidate versus getting the best candidate for the organization. So it's something even for our recruiters and ingenious, we have to take them through training to say, hey, you have to think differently. Like we aren't just going to push candidates through. We need to make sure they're killers.
All right, let's talk about hiring. We both know this is so important. Our listeners know this is so important. You have done a really good job of that, especially recently. You've brought in some really great people. You've motivated some really great people. You've promoted internally. But let's start at the beginning. How do you fill the top of the funnel with great candidates, and what do you look for?
Well, so when it comes to filling the top of the funnel, that's where like having your recruiters, like I like having them on staff. If you have the capability to do it, because if you go outside, you're paying like some of these firms are paying you 20 to 30% of these people's salary. Which is it's a lot, but it could be beneficial on specific key roles, right? But if you could have them in house and have somebody that's just sourcing, and it is a numbers game. It's sales, right? Think of sales where you get top of funnel, you get 100 prospects, and you get X amount of sales qualified leads. That means they set up demos with you, and then out of those, they become opportunities because it's been determined that there's a buy need and there's interest. And then out of that, some of those get executed into revenue, right? Into contracts that become revenue.
You're
It's
running
the
a
exact
sales
same
funnel
thing.
against recruiting.
It's the exact same as sales. It's the same thing with hiring. Like it's a funnel, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's the thing is like if you only bring 10 people to the top of your funnel, what's the best of those 10 that you're going to get? What's your stats of one of them actually being a superstar?
But let's go through the stages. So like we know, sales qualified leads and sales accepted leads and et cetera. But can you walk us through this funnel for recruiting? And maybe we'll cover the sales funnel in a different time. But let's talk about the recruiting funnel.
Yeah, so the recruiting front for us, like I actually before was like, let's just hire and like get these people in and get them going because like it's so critical. We need these people like yesterday,
Everyone
right?
makes that mistake, especially during COVID when it was so hard to hire and you were just like anyone with a pulse, like
Which is
here's a
it's
here's a
terrible
here's a
because
t-shirt, you know?
and we all know the saying, hire slow and fire fast.
Yes.
But it's like I heard it. And I'm like, what does this really mean? And like, how do you hire slower? What's that like? What's that really entail? But like for us, it became stages of an interview, right? So as part of that funnel, it's like, there's that outbound sequence or even inbound of somebody submitting their resume and then the recruiter doing their screening, which are calculated questions that then move to an HR screening that then work into an HR manager screening to we even do async. So like do assignments. Like if it's a product manager, we're going to give you 48 hours to design a product and give us the business economics on it. Go.
I love that.
And they're like, oh, well, I'm busy. I'm working another job. I'm like, figure it out
Well,
because
we do
that's
the same
like,
thing with salespeople where we say, look, like you got to demo something to us. And I always preferred, I sometimes got pushback on this, but I always said, no, I want you to demo our product to us. And he's like, well, I've never
that.
sold your product. And I'm like, okay, I'm not
Cool.
judging you
Perfect.
on your ability to sell our product. I'm judging you on your ability to learn in the next 48 hours about our product and then
Right.
pitch it
Right.
to me. And I want it to be good. And that's how it has to be, in my opinion,
I
as
love
a
that
tech.
approach. That's my favorite approach. I don't give people layups because like a product person can say, "Well, I've been working on this side project, so they have all this mapped out." And they're like, "I'll just show it to you."
No. Or
Like
I've been
you got to
working at
stick
this
them.
company. Let me pitch to you my like little B2C thing that I was working on. Like, I don't care. I want you to pitch what I know, what we know, and what I want you to know when you get on board. That's how it has to be. I don't
That's how
see
it
any
has
other
to
way.
be. I agree. I agree. So, 100% alignment with you on that is like go through that async because you don't want to burn so much of your time that you're just consumed with interviews. So if you could do this asynchronously and get like somebody doing a video submission and going over it, then it just makes it like I play them at 2x and just kind of rip through them like, nope,
Hmm.
next, nope, next, and then as they work through from that, it goes into the next stages.
Well,
So,
hold on. This is just really important. Let me just get this clear. You
yeah.
you take the interviews that your teams do. They're recorded on Zoom, and then
Mhm.
you play them back on the recording.
Oh no, no. So for all of our anybody that's a part of those interview stages, we use an ATS system. It's Greenhouse. So they put in the notes around the questions. But for the async, there's a video. So there's a specific assignment that they have to submit to us. So it
So
could be
just
the
for the
pitch.
assignment, and they do it over a video so that you can watch it asynchronously.
Yeah. And if it goes well, then we get on a call. The hire manager will get on a call and go over that with them and then pepper them with questions.
So you have like a I'm just going to say Dropbox, but you have somewhere where you're storing all of these, and you're able to like probably in the ATS system, and then you're going through them. That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
really good.
there's great video platforms for doing those async types of yeah, I mean you could do it on Loom, right? Like you could say, "Hey, send me a Loom of you doing a pitch, a sales pitch of Ingenious and do a 5-minute demo, technical demo at the end of it." Go. You got 48 hours.
I love
Why
that.
not? And that saves you time. But if they do well, then you could get on and say, it's not very unlikely it's going to be 100% polish. So it's a great time to go in and give them friction and see how they deal with that friction. Give
I
them
love
that
that.
feedback. And if they take that feedback and they're like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense, you start to see that they're adaptable. And adaptable is what you need to be when it comes to any early stage and really anywhere in the world, but like really important when you're at a SaaS startup. You got to be highly adaptable.
So you're taking these asynchronous interviews where you're finding them doing whatever project it is. Project managers have one, salespeople have one, engineers have a different one, maybe solution consultants have theirs. And then you're playing those back, you're seeing how they do, and then you always come with feedback. And that feedback is a way for you to see how adaptable and malleable they are and open minded they are and how collaborative they are. And what do you
Mhm.
find? Like, how do people react? And what should I and our listeners look for when we do
It's really unique in those based on each role and what you're looking for. But like you want to see that, like they're really geeking out and they care, right? If they care, they have that passion. You could tell that they're listening and they're adapting, and they're like, that makes a ton of sense. Or if they're pushing back, we're like, well, like this is the reason why I did it, and like, and sometimes you could learn out of that. So, but you want to be able to debate, and then both sides are like, that was cool.
it? Mm-hmm.
But if you walk away with like, I didn't feel like they really adapted and they're like standing on something that doesn't make a ton of sense, they didn't make it clear to me, like that's going to happen when you hire them. And that's a terrible spot to be in. That's frustrating for both sides. One side feels like they're not being heard, and the other side's like, I really don't grasp what they're trying to accomplish here. And that's a terrible way of operating a business.
That reminds me of Arrested Development, where Tobias Funke does the fire sale and he goes all off on the fire and forgets that it's a sale. And then he's like rolling on the floor for Arrested Development. And the guy goes, "Would you like to try that again?" And he's like, No.
That's a good one. I think you're gonna have to pull up that clip and show that.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, let's
That
see.
would
Let's see
be.
how creative we get.
It's a fire sale.
Oh, okay. I didn't. Well, let's give it a shot. Oh my God! We're having a fire sale. Oh, the burning! It burns me. Evacuate all the school children. Ah! Oh, me! This isn't a fever. Sing, Gray. Can't even see where the knob is. And scene.
Would you like to try that a little simpler, maybe?
No.
That's
Um,
cool.
Nick, before I let you go, I quickly would love to talk just a little bit about your background because I think it is.
Cool.
No, go
Well,
ahead.
there's a few things on that stages. So after that async, eventually it goes to an executive interview. So eventually it makes its way up to me. Especially as a small organization, like smaller organization, even like for the first couple hundred people, like you should be in tune to very critical hires in the organization.
I agree.
These people matter. So
Don't let
there's
anyone tell you
calculated
that you're
questions
you're too involved. You need to be involved.
you need to be
The
involved.
people that tell you
You
you're too involved, they need to not be involved.
Yeah, exactly. So making sure you take it to that executive interview, there's very calculated questions around that. That's important. But like there's two things that I'm really looking at when it comes to hiring people. There's emerging talent and proven talent.
Mm,
So
explain that.
emerging talent is they have the passion, they have the mindset, they have the drive, they're relentless, they show up every day no matter the stress put on them. And they haven't proven themselves yet to the market.
Mm,
Right? Like that's a big difference. So somebody that's proven has taken a company from Series A, B, C, D, or taken it public, massive success. And those people are going to be way more expensive because they've proven themselves. They've already enriched themselves likely from that journey.
yeah.
So you're de-risked from it. But it's hard for early stage startups to afford people that are in that base, like substantial base salary. But there's a balance. It depends, like on where you're at in your market. If you raise a significant amount of money, you might be able to afford going with proven talent to de-risk
But
your
also you have, and
execution.
I'm sure you've had this, like you have proven talent where they may have had a lot of success at one company and they're not going to be able to recreate that. Or
100%.
or they've had success in multiple companies, which is what you want to look for in proven talent. Proven talent at one company, I made this mistake more than I want to admit. You did
Okay.
really good at one company. You come into this company, and all of a sudden, you don't actually know what you're doing because there was a different structure, a different situation, and you're barely staying afloat. Or even worse, you came from multiple successful companies, and now you're really should be working at a venture fund or doing something a little bit more. No, I don't want to, like that's still hard work, but it's different from being an operator. You need to be doing something that
Is the
isn't this
different.
intense.
Yeah, I completely concur with you in that regard because, even on proven talent, I'm looking for keywords of like, well, we figured out this versus I
Mm,
figured out this
I love
because I'm
that.
like, well, who's we? I'm like, oh, well, I was working with the CRO and you're the VP of sales. And like like it was really your CRO that was creating these strategies that ended up creating the winning playbook. It wasn't you. So like, are you going to be able to learn this and adapt to this particular industry? And I found out a couple of times that didn't work at all. I thought they
Hmm.
would, and they would be adaptable. I actually
Turns
my
out they're
biggest
not.
success. Yeah, they weren't adaptable, and great people. Like I personally, there's a lot of
All
people
of
I
them are.
really enjoyed along the way, but it's just not the right mindset to
90%
execute.
of the people that you work with are great human beings. That does not
100%.
mean that they're going to be successful in your organization. And
Exactly.
and the people, I know you're like this, I'm like this. It's always my fault. I shouldn't have brought you in. It was my mistake.
100%.
But it's never a comment on what they are as people, and that's you got to make sure that you remind yourself of that, and that you remind them of that, because making a career change, going through a career change is a big deal. Nobody wants to do a bad job. Nobody wants to feel like they're doing a bad job.
No one wants to hire somebody for them to fail.
No, nobody wants
Right.
to hire for someone
But
them to
but
fail.
it's the contrary to the mindset of when they do fail and they're like, it's all your fault. And like I would say even early on, in that even a year and a half ago, like I would do whatever I could to fight to get them to succeed. And like the crazy thing is like whatever I could do to incentivize them to succeed, or like is like, hey, like if you don't do this, I have to fire you like next week. I can be that blunt. Like, and some people would say, okay, I'll get it done. And they would do it the next week and get those specific objectives done. And then the next week, their performance just goes to shit. And, and, it's hard. And like I would say in that perspective, because it's really hard to see the sky when you're in the trenches day in, day out, and you start getting tied into storylines of like why something didn't work. But when you start hiring A players or superstars, it's a different strategy of like who you're working with. It's a different like energy that just comes in you. Like you wake up and people are, by the time you, and I wake up early and I'll get on and like, oh, 1 a.m. these people were solving these problems and I figured this out. And I'm like, that's cool. And I'm like, literally, that's cool. That's awesome. Great job. Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Like it's a whole different energy than waking up in the middle of the night sweating, thinking that you got to go in and like drag somebody across the finish line.
Well, and it's also like you mentioned those storylines. I've seen this time and time again. Those storylines start accumulating within the organization, and people start telling stories, and their stories get told over and over again. And they're not true, but they make you feel really good, and they're not helping you create your objective. And then you start seeing the organization having a flatline, and you're like, what is happening? Why are we going through this process? And it's because the organization requires better talent, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, to your point, it's like a distorted reality based on these different storylines in their purview, right? Like,
Mm,
and I think the thing is like when people are open to debate and discuss and have good logic and reasoning, and everybody's rowing in the same direction, you get optimal outcomes. It's the good old, putting the stone in the tumbler and like putting the friction, it becomes a diamond type of situation. Like you have to have everybody in that mindset, but they have to be intelligently debating and coming to that logic and that reasoning versus, like I don't care what he says. I'm doing it my way,
yeah.
even though it's failing. Like I've said, and you've gone through that. You've seen it
Yes.
time and time again. It's just so much opportunity loss that goes through that journey, and it stacks up on your plate, and it's more stressing versus like more stress than energizing for you to go through a journey. I'm more energized today than I ever been, just because the people that I have within Ingenious now.
Yes. The people that you hire are the most important part of building the business, especially once you get that 0 to 1.
Mhm.
Once you start building an organization, that's what matters. Nick, we're going to do a part two. We're going to stop it here. We're going to do another session with you because I think this was incredibly valuable to me. I hope it was just as valuable to our listeners. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for being on this podcast. And I can't wait to have you back.
Thanks for having me, man. I hope we could help these founders out and shorten up their journey to make sure they succeed.
That's the plan. Thanks, Nick.